As I flickered the flashlight, its beam danced across Clockwork City's antique shop walls, revealing my cat's glowing violet eyes watching me from amidst pungent, scorched hair smells. Dust motes swirled in the light like frozen snowflakes, each one carrying the faint scent of ozone and sulfur, like the air after a storm that never rains. The wallpaper's pastel patterns shifted as I moved, the faded roses and daisies seeming to twist into faces, their painted eyes following me with silent accusation. My cat, a sleek shadow with fur that absorbed the light rather than reflected it, padded silently toward the tarnished mirror propped against a case of clockwork birds. Its violet eyes burned brighter as I leaned closer, the glass surface unnaturally cold even through my gloves. I brushed a fingertip against the mirror's edge, the glass yielding like damp clay. Then it went grabbed, not a pull but a pressure, a sudden icy suction that pulled my finger into the glass itself. A low guttural growl vibrated through the shop, not from the clockwork bird's tiny gears but from the walls themselves, a sound like stones grinding in a throat. I yanked my hand back, but the mirror's surface rippled, the glass shattering inward as if struck by an invisible fist. Shards flew in all directions, catching the light like scattered constellations. The cat's head tilted, pupils dilating into perfect black voids, and for a split second, each shard reflected not the room, but my own face wide-eyed, mouth open in a silent scream. The air thickened with the smell of burnt hair and hot metal. Click. The mechanical shutter sound, sharp as a snapped bone, echoed from the mirror's broken frame, the sound of a ghost camera capturing the moment of my terror. The cat's violet eyes, now glowing faintly through the shards, mimicked my expression exactly, pupils wide with panic, the irises reflecting my own terrified face in every fractured piece. I stumbled back, my breath coming in ragged gasps that tasted like licking a battery. The clockwork birds in their case began to move, their tiny brass wings clicking in time with the shutter's echo, a relentless mechanical click-click-click-click that matched the frantic hammering of my own heart. The cat's gaze never wavered, its violet eyes glowing brighter through the glass, each shard a tiny distorted window into my own unraveling. The wallpaper patterns shifted again, the roses blooming into screaming mouths, the sulfur smell turning metallic on my tongue, and the cat's pupils dilated further, swallowing the light, swallowing my reflection whole. I knelt, the floorboards yielding a dry creak under my weight, and reached for the book. It was tucked between a chipped porcelain doll and a stack of tarnished music boxes, bound in leather so cracked, it felt like dried scales under my fingertips. The scent of it, old paper and something else, something akin to scorched sugar, filled my nostrils. 1692 was embossed in faded gold lettering, a diary. I traced the letters, the leather cool and brittle. My fingers ached, a phantom echo of the tremors I'd been fighting all day, or perhaps not fighting. Surrendering to the pages within were filled with a spidery frantic script, the ink bleeding into the yellowed paper. The words spoke of whispers and shadows of a village gripped by fear, and a man, a presence à défaire. Described only as lacking a face, he was summoned, the diary claimed, by a tooth-shaped whistle, carved from bone, a relic of ancient, forgotten things. Each line felt like a prickle against my skin, a coldness that seeped deeper than the sharp perpetual chill. The clockwork birds, silent since the mirror shattered, began to stir, a tiny hesitant flicker from one, then another, until the case vibrated with a low rhythmic pulse. It wasn't the smooth whir of gears, but something off. A subsonic growl, a vibration in the bones, seemed to emanate from the walls, mirroring the frantic scroll on the page. It resonated with the ozone smell, making it sharper, acrid. I flipped a page, the paper resisting, threatening to tear. A torn fragment, ripped cleanly away, revealed a single dark impression pressed against a bloodstain. A paw print. Small, neat, undeniably feline. But the ink had bled around it, distorting the pad, elongating the claws. It wasn't a fresh print, it was old, aged as if pressed into the page decades ago. The cat, who had been a motionless shadow since the mirror incident, shifted, its violet eyes reflecting the dim light like polished amethysts. The wallpaper. I could escape it. The pastel roses and daisies, once merely faded, were now shifting, not in a way my eyes could track, but a subtle distortion of perception. A fleeting impression of a face, small and pale, forming within the floral pattern. A child's face with wide, vacant eyes. It was there, then gone, replaced by the familiar, innocuous blooms. But the impression lingered, a phantom weight on my vision. Click, asterisk the sound, sharper this time, echoed from the broken mirror frame. Slower, deliberate, as if a camera, ancient and malfunctioning, was recording my descent. My breath hitched in my throat, a ragged rasp against the sulphurous air. The birds' clicking increased, a frantic counterpoint to the growl from the walls, the mechanical rhythm now echoing the frantic beat of my heart. It was a maddening, insistent tempo. I scanned the diary, desperate for something, anything, to ground me. The handwriting grew more erratic, the sentences fragmented, filled with paranoia. Asterisk. He wears the shape of your guilt, asterisk, one line declared, the ink smeared as if written in a fever dream. My guilt. What guilt? The edges of my memory felt frayed, dissolving like old photographs. The shop felt smaller, the walls closing in, the air thick and suffocating. My gaze fell on the final page, or where the final page should to be. It was gone. Torn away, leaving only the ragged edge of the binding. And pressed against the leather, warm against my palm, was another paw print, identical to the one on the diary. But this one, fresh, still faintly damp. The cat, silent, unmoving, watched me with those luminous violet eyes, its gaze unwavering. A slow, deliberate blink. It was a mirror of my own growing terror. I approached the whistle, a bone white tooth carved into something ancient and forbidden. It lay on the diary's open page like an accusation, its jagged edge glinting in the dim light. The scent of ozone was thick, cloying, making each breath feel like inhaling static electricity. The cat watched me with those violet eyes from across the room, a silent sentinel. Its tail twitched once, twice, then stilled as if sensing my intention. My fingers trembled as I reached for the whistle, not daring to look away from its malevolent gaze. Fring click. The sound echoed through the shop, sharp and deliberate, like a camera shutter capturing an unwanted truth. It resonated with the growl that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, vibrating in my bones, making my teeth ache. I raised the whistle to my lips, feeling its coldness against my skin. My reflection stared back at me through the broken mirror frame, distorted by cracks like spiderwebs across shattered glass. I hesitated, then blew hard into it. A ghostly whisper rasped out, echoing around the shop. Your hands are burning. It was a voice from another time, another place, but unmistakably present now. The scent of sulfur intensified, thick as molten lead, mixing with ozone until my nostrils burned, and my eyes watered. My palms throbbed suddenly, agonizingly, like two brands pressed against flesh. I looked down at them, seeing the faint outline of a jagged burn mark on each one, smelling scorched hair like an acrid perfume. The birds' clicking increased, humming now in discordant harmony with my heartbeat. Click. Another shutter release, slower this time, echoing through the shop like thunder from empty skies. Why won't you bleed? I looked up at my reflection again, watching as violet light spread across my skin like a stain seeping into fabric. It pulsed rhythmically, matching the throb in my palms and the mechanical growl that seemed to come from everywhere now. My breath hitched in my throat, coming out ragged, echoing through the shop along with the dissonant lullaby of the birds. The cat stood suddenly, arching its back like a question mark before slinking away into shadows that felt too deep for mere darkness. Flick. 3 times. This time, erratic staccato, like an ancient camera malfunctioning in its haste to capture my descent. I watched as blood welled up along the burn marks on my palms, then slid down my fingers and dripped onto the floorboards with a wet plop-plop. But it didn't smell right. It smelled burnt, acrid like singed hair rather than metallic like spilled life. The reflection in the mirror showed me why. My skin was glowing faintly violet now, veins of pulsating light tracing paths beneath my flesh as if something moved just under the surface, writhing and alive. Click, another shutter release, slower still, almost mournful this time. And then silence. No more growling walls or clicking birds or rasping whispers. Just me standing there in the pastel nightmare of the shop, hands burning with ancient fire, skin glowing like a corpse lantern under violet light. The whistle lay shattered at my feet now, its bone white tooth broken into jagged shards that seemed to grin back up at me from their position on the floorboards. And all I could do was stare down at them as blood continued to drip steadily onto what remained of the ancient relic, each droplet smelling like burnt offerings and final realizations. But there was no weight in my chest now, no void swallowing everything whole. Instead, it felt like something had finally broken free inside me, snapping its chains after centuries held captive within darkness unseen by human eyes until now. I lunged towards the shop door, my heart pounding like a steam hammer in my chest. Each step echoed through the room, punctuated by the mechanical shutter, clicks that seemed to anticipate my movements. The cat stood motionless before me, its violet eyes unblinking, sentinels against escape. My hand reached for the handle, fingers brushing cold metal, but instead of turning, it resisted, refusing to yield under my grip. I pushed harder, palm flattening against the surface until sweat beaded on my forehead. Then came a sound unlike any other, a wet sucking noise as if the very air around me was being drawn into an invisible maw. Click. The shutter sounded again, slower this time, almost deliberate. A pause followed, heavy and expectant like thunder before lightning splits the sky. My breath caught in my throat when I noticed it. The handle wasn't melting so much as evaporating under my touch, consumed by some unseen force. The scent of sulfur filled my nostrils, acrid and overwhelming, burning away any remnants of ozone left behind from earlier. It was a smell that clung to the back of my tongue, bitter like bile rising up in protest against this violation of nature's laws. I jerked my hand away, but it was too late. My flesh sizzled where it had contacted the handle, blisters forming instantly beneath my skin. I watched in horror as they grew larger, bursting under pressure until blood welled up and dripped onto the floorboards below. The clockwork bird's growls deepened now, mimicking a choked gasp echoing through the shop. It felt like their mechanical hearts beat alongside mine, synchronized by some unseen conductor, orchestrating our shared descent into madness. Footweeze, another shutter release, followed by silence once more. Then something moved, a flick of tail against floorboards that echoed louder than any thunderclap could. The cat's tail twitched again, this time slower, almost deliberate as it stared at me with those piercing violet eyes. I stepped back instinctively, breaking eye contact to glance down at my hand. Blood still dripped steadily from the wounds left by melted metal, each droplet hitting the floorboards like a metronome counting out seconds until what would happen next. The door handle was gone now, swallowed whole into whatever void had opened up beneath it. All that remained were wisps of smoke curling upwards like spectral fingers beckoning me closer. But I knew better than to heed their call. Instead, I turned away from the cat's unblinking gaze and surveyed my surroundings for another means of escape. My eyes landed on a window across the room, its glass panes clouded with age but still intact. If I could reach it before the cat blocked my path again. But as if reading my thoughts, the creature moved suddenly, placing itself squarely between me and freedom once more. Its tail flicked once more, a slow, deliberate stare directed towards my injured hand. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trapped in a silent standoff with this glowing-eyed guardian of hellish realms beyond comprehension. Until finally, breaking the tension, another shutter clicked on set, then paused as if marking time until some inevitable conclusion arrived at last. I retched, doubling over as my stomach convulsed. Pastel wallpaper patterns swirled around me like a sickening merry-go-round rose fading into sickly yellow. Then back again in an endless cycle that made bile rise up my throat once more. I coughed, spitting flecks of color onto the floorboards which seemed to absorb them greedily. The clockwork birds' growls had shifted now, their mechanical hearts beating out a rhythm not unlike a child's whimper echoing through the shop. It was unnerving how they mirrored my own descent into madness, each shuddering breath synchronizing with their metallic pulses. I wiped my mouth on my sleeve and straightened up just as something caught my eye. A small scrap of paper tucked behind an antique clock face across the room. Its edges were torn unevenly, like it had been ripped from a larger sheet hurriedly. As I approached, each footstep echoing loudly in the heavy silence, I could see that it was yellowed with age and bore spidery handwriting. "Joseph," it began, "age 12, why won't you leave?" My heart hammered against my ribs at those familiar words, echoing thoughts from years ago when life seemed simpler. But there was no time for nostalgia. Panic surged through me instead as I realized the implications of this discovery. Somehow, something here knew about my past. The mechanical shutter clicked once more, 4 times in total now, and with each release, the wallpaper patterns pulsed with heat against my skin. They throbbed like veins filled with venomous blood beneath their powdery surface, threatening to burst at any moment and consume me whole. My hands felt clumsier than ever as I reached out tentatively towards one particularly prominent rose pattern on the wall beside me. It seemed almost alive under my touch, swelling slightly before shrinking back again like a frightened creature seeking refuge within its own skin. But when I pressed harder, digging nails into the paper until they left crescent moons behind in their wake, it yielded unexpectedly. Beneath lay not plasterboard but something softer, warmer, flesh-like. Revulsion coiled around my spine as comprehension dawned. These weren't merely patterns etched onto wallpaper, they were faces trapped beneath layers of pastel paint. And now that I'd broken through one barrier, others began to swell up around me too, jaws stretched wide in silent screams, eyes bulging desperately against their confines. I stumbled back, horror clutching at my chest like a physical weight threatening to crush ribs into dust. The room spun again, but this time it wasn't nausea-causing vertigo. Instead, it was the sudden realization that everything here might be alive, and trapped, including myself perhaps. A chill ran down my spine despite the oppressive heat emanating from those pulsating faces. My breath misted in front of me now too, frosting over like condensation on a winter's night, even though sweat trickled down temples and neck. Then came another sound, not quite a growl, but not entirely human either. A wet rasp echoing through the shop as if something large was dragging itself along floorboards slick with. Was that blood, or worse still? I turned slowly, eyes scanning the gloom until they landed on what could only be described as a man in silhouette against a backdrop of throbbing wallpaper. He wore a tailored suit expensive by all appearances, and yet there were no facial features discernible beneath his wide-brimmed hat. Just an empty void where his face should have been. My reflection stared back at me from the mirror opposite him, but it wasn't mine anymore, not entirely anyway. There stood Joseph Novak, aged 12 again, with those same glowing violet eyes that seemed to haunt every corner of this godforsaken place now. And though I wanted nothing more than to reach out and touch my younger self's cheek, to reassure myself he was still real somehow, I knew better than to break the fourth wall between us. Instead, I stood there frozen like a rabbit caught in headlights while behind me that rasping sound grew louder. Closer, click. The mechanical shutter sounded once more, 5 times now, and with it came an end to all pretenses of control. For as those pastel faces pulsed one last time before bursting open wide, I knew there'd be no leaving this Clockwork City alive. The air in the shop had thickened into something viscous, cloying like breathing through wet wool. My fingers trembled, still stained with the pastel venom of the wallpaper's faces, the heat of them lingering against my skin like a fever. The clockwork birds had gone silent, their mechanical hearts stilled, but the silence wasn't empty. It hummed, a low-frequency vibration that rattled my teeth. Then, shutter, the sound was sharp, unnatural, like the snap of a rusted hinge. 5 times. 5 deliberate clicks, each one a needle prick in the dark. My head jerked toward the sound, and there he stood, emerged from the wall itself, as if the wood had split open to let him through. His suit was the color of old ivory, frayed at the cuffs like the edges of a half-melted candle. The fabric didn't move with him. It were rasped, depressed, each step a wet whisper of parchment being dragged across stone. I should have run, but my legs were lead, my lungs frozen. His hat cast a shadow that swallowed his face entirely, leaving only the faintest outline of a brim. No eyes, no nose. Just the hollow where his head should have been. And yet, shutter. The camera in my mind clicked again, and for a single, sickening second, I saw the violet afterimage of his palm pressing into my shoulder. Sun-bleached bone yellowed at the edges like paper left too long in the sun. No warmth, no weight. Just the ghost of a touch, and the scent of ozone sharp enough to burn the back of my throat. "Your guilt is a cage," he whispered. His voice wasn't a voice. It was the sound of gears grinding, of a clock's hands moving backward, of a child's laughter caught in a bottle and left to sour. The words slithered into my skull, unraveling something deep and rotten. My hands flew to my temples, but there was no pain, only the sudden overwhelming certainty that I had always known this. Always the wallpaper behind him pulsed, the faces beneath the paint writhing as if reacting to his presence. The air thickened further, the scent of sulfur curling around me like smoke. My breath came in ragged gasps, and when I exhaled, my breath fogged, not from cold, but from the heat radiating off the walls, the floor, the Forneman. His suit began to shift, the fabric softening at the edges, dripping like wax from a guttering candle. I reached out, fingers trembling, and pressed against his sleeve. It was warm, too warm. The fabric gave way beneath my touch, not tearing, not melting, unfolding, like a flower in reverse. The seams split open, peeling back in slow, deliberate layers. No skin, no flesh. Just the same sun-bleached bone, smooth and featureless, stretching endlessly beneath the cloth. His entire body was a hollow suit, a mannequin stuffed with nothing but the weight of his own absence. And then, shutter, the last click. The light in the room dimmed, not fading but 20 shrinking, pulling inward like a wound closing. The wallpaper faces screamed behind me, their painted mouths gaping wider, wider, and the cat was there, not the violet-eyed thing from before. This one was black, its fur drinking in the dimness, its pupils vertical slits like a serpent's. It moved with the same jerky precision as the faceless man, tail lashing like a whip. It didn't hiss, it purred, a low, rhythmic hum that vibrated through my bones. "Run," it seemed to say. But the floor beneath me was no longer floor. It was sunken, stretched taut and glistening. The walls now a labyrinth of veins pulsing with the same sickly pastel light. The faceless man's empty eyes, no, not eyes, just the absence of them, turned toward me, and his mouth moved, though no sound came. "You were always the cage," he whispered, and the walls began to breathe. My fingers scraped against the grit of my own skin, tracing the ridges of bone beneath. The diary spoke of burning, of a fever beneath the surface. Not illness, but a mirroring, a demand. I needed to fully feel what it felt, to understand the source of its torment. The words weren't a suggestion, they were a command etched into the hollows of my skull. The air tasted of static, a prickling dryness that coated my tongue. It wasn't thirst, it was anticipation. A frantic, childish need to complete a circuit. I pressed harder, nails digging into the flesh of my cheek, seeking the phantom heat, the imagined scorch. A thin line blossomed, slick and dark. It didn't hurt, not yet. It was a dull pressure, like a bruise forming beneath the skin. Click. The sound, sharp and precise, echoed in the cavern of my skull. A mechanical shutter, recording the descent. I didn't look. I couldn't. The diary lay open on the floor, the brittle pages whispering with each tremor of the walls. The script, spidery and faded, seemed to writhe before my eyes. I moved to my forearm, the skin strangely numb. The scent of sulfur had intensified, clinging to the back of my throat like a shroud. It mingled with something else, something metallic and acrid. The first bead of crimson welled, a slow, deliberate bloom against the pale canvas of my skin. I focused on the sensation, the slight give of the tissue, the warm slickness spreading outwards. Click. The sound was closer now, as if the mechanism itself was circling me. The cat, a shadow distilled into form, watched from the corner of the room. Its tail moved, a slow, deliberate metronome, marking the rhythm of my self-destruction. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It simply observed. The diary page fluttered, disturbed by the subtle pulse of the walls. The words "Timben burned with me" seemed to glow with an internal luminescence. A perverse logic took hold, a child's understanding of cause and effect. If I could replicate the pain, I could understand. I could dim become it. The fifth line appeared on my arm, a constellation of red against my skin. The numbness was fading, replaced by a throbbing ache. It wasn't the pain of injury, but the pain of remembering. Fragments of a life I hadn't known, I'd forgotten. A childhood lost, a love betrayed, a promise broken. Each scratch a key unlocking a rusted door. Clickin', my vision swam. The room tilted, the walls breathing in time with the throbbing in my arm. The wallpaper, a sea of pastel faces, pulsed with a sickening rhythm. Their painted eyes followed me, their mouths stretched into silent screams. The floor beneath my bare feet felt soft. Too soft, like walking on something yielding, something alive. Flick. I raised a hand, trembling, and touched my face again. The skin felt slick, almost polished. I stumbled towards the shattered mirror propped against the wall. The glass was clouded with age, distorted and fractured. My reflection stared back, a pale and haunted mask. But something was different, my eyes. They weren't my eyes anymore. The irises had lost their brown, replaced by a luminous, unnatural violet. The color wasn't vibrant, but hungry. It absorbed the dim light, radiating a cold, ethereal glow. I looked like the cat. The cat. The final shutter clicked, a resonant, hollow sound that seemed to shake the very foundations of the shop. A drop of blood loosened from my arm, fell and landed on the strange, soft floor. It didn't pool. It didn't spread. It twin glowed. A vibrant, pulsing violet mirroring the light in my eyes. The liquid shimmered, radiating a warmth that reached out, enveloping the patch of floor. The soft texture beneath my feet shifted, quivered, and began to expand, the violet glow spreading like a stain. The realization bloomed, a sickly sweetness coating my tongue. It wasn't my experiencing this. It was something else. The violet in my eyes pulsed, a mocking imitation of awareness. The shop itself seemed to exhale, a gust of ozone and something older, something like the dust of forgotten prayers. Clockwork birds perched on brass branches began a hesitant song, a childish lullaby that scraped against my sanity. Click at the first shutter. The cat. It wasn't simply for presenter. It was pressing. A weight against my throat, a rasping friction like tearing paper. The scent intensified to sulfur, yes, but beneath it a deeper, more unsettling aroma, the tang of old wood and something akin to fear, not mine, but emanating from the very structure of the shop. I tried to draw back, but my limbs felt heavy, unresponsive. A marionette with frayed strings, my memories felt distant, like looking through frosted glass. Fragments of adult logic clung to the edges of my mind, desperate to hold on, but the tide of something simpler, something younger, was pulling me under. I remembered building blocks, a rocking horse, the taste of honey on a spoon, These weren't my memories. They were layered, superimposed. Flicker the click of the second shutter. The cat's pressure increased, a silent demand. My fingers, clumsy and uncoordinated, fumbled at the collar of my own shirt. A childish frustration welled up, a sudden, inexplicable urge to push, to break free. But the effort felt monumental, exhausting. The wallpaper faces, the pastel nightmare, seemed to lean closer, their painted eyes filled with a disconcerting mixture of pity and amusement. They weren't observing me. They were waiting for something to unravel. I tried to speak, to scream, but only a gurgling sound escaped my throat. A sound a baby might make. Click the third shutter. The floor, that unsettlingly soft expanse, shifted beneath my feet. It wasn't yielding like earth, it felt more like skin, a taut stretched membrane vibrating with a low, guttural hum. The sound resonated in my bones, a primal vibration that bypassed my ears entirely. I reached out instinctively and touched the wall. The texture wasn't wood or plaster. It was fibrous, like the inside of a hollow gourd, and warm, uncomfortably warm. The scent of sulfur was almost unbearable now, mingling with the sickly sweetness of something ripening, something decaying. Click, click, the fourth shutter. The cat's grip tightened. I felt a sharp, stinging pain in my throat, a burning sensation that made me gasp. The clockwork bird's lullaby warped, twisting into a discordant, unsettling melody. The violet in my eyes burned brighter, reflecting the shop's single, flickering bulb. The fragments of adult thought receded further, leaving behind a swirling vortex of instinct and sensation, a desire for comfort, for warmth, for the rhythmic rocking of a cradle. I wanted to be held, clicked a fifth shutter. The cat's rasping breath tickled my skin, sending a wave of infantile panic through me. I wanted it to stop. I wanted my forsaken mother. The word formed in my mind, fragile and fleeting, like a butterfly's wing. Flicker, the sixth shutter. My vision blurred. The pastel faces swam in a sea of distorted light. I felt a sudden overwhelming urge to 40 crawl, to burrow, to disappear into the soft, pulsating floor. Flicky, the seventh shutter. The cat's weight was almost unbearable now, a crushing pressure that stole the air from my lungs. I struggled, weakly, instinctively, trying to break free. But my limbs were leaden, unresponsive. A helpless puppet dancing to a tune I couldn't comprehend. Click it. The eighth shutter. The cat's violet eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity, eclipsing the dim light of the shop. They were not the eyes of an animal. They were the eyes of something ancient, something patient, something that had been waiting. A deep, resonant hum filled the shop, vibrating through the floor, through the walls, through my very being. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling, a sense of inevitability. The violet light pulsed, radiating warmth, and I sank into the soft floor, becoming one with the pulsing, breathing shop. The air in the shop tasted of something stale, like the inside of a forgotten jar left too long in the sun. My fingers left smears of damp across the wall, the texture of the paper soft beneath my palms, almost alive. It pulsed just slightly with a rhythm that matched the hum of the clockwork birds, their song a lullaby I recognized but couldn't place. My name wasn't Joseph anymore. It was something smaller, something that fit inside a crib. The thought made my chest tighten, but not with fear, with longing. I crawled. The floor was warm beneath me, the fibers of the carpet yielding like skin. The pastel nightmare of the wallpaper stretched and contracted, the yellow and pink swirling into patterns that resembled faces, smiling, watching. Their mouths moved in time with the birds singing along in silent harmony. I hummed too, a tune without words, my voice a whisper against the carpet. The sound of the shutter clicked once twice, a mechanical stutter 9 times in total, each plicky to a clicker like a heartbeat, each plick a quacker sifting. A step closer to something I couldn't name. The doll lay ahead, propped against a shelf of broken teacups and tarnished silver. Its porcelain skin was cold, but not unpleasantly so. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the smooth curve of its cheek. The doll's eyes were closed, lashes delicate as spider silk. I traced them with my thumb, and the lullaby twisted in my throat, a song that wanted to be sung but couldn't quite form. The walls of the shop seemed to lean in, the wood grain opening like gills, inhaling the scent of ozone, and something older, something like damp earth after rain. I pressed my forehead against the doll's shoulder. The fabric of its dress was stiff, the stitching uneven, as if sewn by hands that trembled. The shutter clicked again, and the doll's eyes snapped open, not with the hollow stare of porcelain, but with a glow, a violet light that pulsed like a heartbeat. My breath hitched. The cat's reflection stared back from the doll's back, its own violet eyes gleaming in the glassy surface. It wasn't watching me. It was waiting. The lullaby swelled inside me, a pressure building behind my ribs. I rocked back and forth, the doll cradled against my chest, my fingers tracing the seam of its mouth. The stitching was loose, the fabric peeling away in places, revealing something dark beneath. I pulled harder, and the doll's head lolled, the seam of its neck gaping open like a second mouth. The violet light flared, and the cat's reflection in the doll's back blinked, once, twice, before melting into the glass, leaving only the cat itself, its fur bristling, its gaze locked onto me. The walls breathed, the carpet pulsed. The clockwork birds sang louder, their song now a discordant wail, a sound that grated against my bones. The doll's eyes widened, the violet glow spilling over my face warm and suffocating. I wanted to scream, but my throat was full of honey, thick and sweet, choking me. The cat's tail lashed, a whip of fur against the carpet, the sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. I pressed my ear to the doll's chest. The heartbeat was slow, steady, a rhythm that matched the shutter's click, the wall's pulse, the cat's tail. It was a song I knew, a song that had been waiting for me. The doll's lips parted, and I heard it, the lullaby finally, sung in a voice that wasn't mine. It was the voice of something small, something lost, something that had been crying in the dark for a very long time. The cat's reflection in the doll's back twitched. The violet eyes gleamed, and then the doll's head turned. My fingers scraped the carpet, leaving trails of damp where my knuckles dragged. The fibers were warm, alive, each one a tiny root pulling me toward the door. Pastel wallpaper pulsed with faces that weren't there, their mouths moving in time with the shutter's clicks. Click, 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 10 times. Each sound like a tiny hammer tapping on the inside of my skull, counting down. The air tasted like the memory of cold coins. I crawled, my infant limbs clumsy, the carpet's softness a counterpoint to the growing heat on my palms. The door handle was just ahead, a brass knob glowing faintly. I reached, and the metal melted into smoke beneath my touch. Not hot, but fudrong, like butter dissolving under a sunbeam. The smoke smelled like burnt sugar and old rain. The cat watched from the shelf, its violet eyes wide and unblinking. The glow intensified, pushing back the pastel walls, making the yellow and pink swirl into something sharp and bright. The shutter clicked again, click, and the cat's reflection in the doll's back vanished, replaced by the reflection of my own face, wide eyes, round cheeks, nothing left of Joseph. The walls leaned closer, the wood grain opening like a mouth. I heard the clockwork birds scream, a sound like rusted hinges tearing, click, 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 10 times. The door handle was gone, replaced by smoke that coiled into nothing. I turned my head, the movement slow, heavy. The cat's violet eyes flared, brighter than the city's dying light, brighter than the sun. The smoke curled into the shape of the door, then vanished. The air where it had been tasted empty, cold. My fingers were damp, sticky with something I couldn't name. The cat blinked, and its eyes pulsed violet. Quick, a sound like a tiny camera shutter, but deeper, wetter. The walls breathed in time with my shallow, infant gasps. I tried to speak, but only a gurgle came out, wet and thick like syrup. The cat's reflection in its own eyes showed my face again. Smaller, younger, the skin tight across my bones. The violet glow flared, and I felt the pressure behind my eyes, a rhythm matching the shutter's clicks. Click, 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 click. The cat's tail twitched, a quick whip of fur against the carpet. Skitter, skitter. The sound was like dry leaves underfoot, but wrong, too sharp, too precise. The violet light in the cat's eyes pulsed faster, a heartbeat for the city. I pressed my forehead to the floor, the carpet's warmth seeping into my skin. The pastel nightmare of the wallpaper seemed to tighten around me, the yellow and pink pressing closer. Click. The sound was a knife sliding through my ribs. Click-wick. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thickening like wet wool. The cat's eyes were the only light left in the room, the only thing that didn't melt or disappear. The door was gone. The room was gone. Only the cat's violet eyes and my own infant face reflected in them. The shutter clicked for the last time. Click. The room held its breath. I blinked, and the cat's eyes were gone. Only my own face stared back, wide and wet, reflected in the empty space where the door had been. The air tasted like nothing at all.